High Pontiff Vael of the Conclave adjusted the folds of his ceremonial light-woven robes, his three hearts beating a slow, reverent rhythm. He stood on the bridge of the sacred word, a vessel that was less a ship and more a kilometer long, mobile cathedral of polished white alloy and glowing crystalline spires. His bridge was not a place of tactical displays and frantic officers. It was a silent, vaulted chamber, its walls inscribed with the litanies of the Firstborn, its air filled with the scent of sanctified, ionized gas. Vael was a creature of profound, ancient faith, his tall, slender form radiating the calm blue-green aura of a being who knew with absolute certainty his place in the cosmos. His place, and the place of all the younger races, was to serve the memory of the gods who had come before, the Firstborn, humanity. For 100,000 years the galaxy had been an orphan. The Firstborn had been the first to light the fire of consciousness, the first to bend space-time, the first to touch the stars. They had, in their infinite wisdom, seeded 1,000 worlds, guiding the evolution of the Cathal, the Gnarl, the Sylvan, and all the other younger races before, vanishing in a silent, unexplained event known only as the Great Departure. They left behind a single, final divine instruction, a quarantine, a great seal placed around their home system, the forbidden cradle, the Holy of Holies, soul. The seal was a perfect, shimmering golden sphere of energy, a do not disturb, sign from the gods themselves, a place no younger race was to ever, under penalty of absolute sacrilege, approach. The Conclave, the unified religious and political body of the younger races, had spent 100 millennia dutifully, worshipfully, obeying. They were the galaxy's faithful children, awaiting a sign of their parents' return, and then the sign had come. It began as a whisper, a faint, anomalous energy pulse detected by the deep space augurs. It was dismissed as a sensor ghost, but the whisper grew, becoming a pattern, a clumsy, chaotic, but undeniably intelligent signal, emanating from the very heart of the forbidden cradle. It was not the elegant, harmonic, faster-than-light wave language of the Firstborn. It was a primitive, brutal, electromagnetic pulse, a series of simple mathematical beeps and boops. To the Conclave's scientific minds, it was an impossibility. To the religious minds, it was a test of faith. But to High Pontiff Vael, it was a call. It is not the Firstborn themselves, he had declared before the Conclave, his voice resonating with the power of his conviction. It is the echo. It is the voice of the cradle, the divine alarm clock they left behind, signaling their imminent return. They are waking up, and they are calling their children home. Now, he commanded the Holy Fleet, a glorious armada of 1,000 cathedral ships, a fleet built not for war, but for a pilgrimage. They had translated into the outer reaches of the Sol system, their arrival a silent, reverent insertion. Vael stood before the vast, crystalline viewport, his multifaceted eyes gazing at the distant, unremarkable yellow star that was their holy ancestral sun. His primary acolytes were filtering the signals, the chaotic noise, and attempting to find the prime voice, the word of God they had been sent to receive. Holiness, an acolyte chimed, his own aura a nervous, flickering yellow. The signals are voluminous. They are crude, overlapping, and deeply chaotic. We cannot find a single coherent message. It is a babble. Vael's expression remained serene. The gods are stirring from their long slumber, he said, his voice a soothing balm. Their first words will of course be confused. We are not here to understand. We are here to listen. Proceed to the third planet, the holy earth, as the litany of departure commands. Prepare the greeting chamber. We are about to be the first of the younger races to look upon the face of our creators. Let our faith be as perfect as their design. Dr. Eris Thorne, a man who had sacrificed his marriage, his tenure, and his hairline for the cold, sterile, and utterly silent embrace of deep space radio astronomy, was not having a good day. He sat in the cluttered, coffee-stained control room of the Arecibo 2 radio telescope, a massive next-generation dish built into a lunar crater, and stared at his screen in a state of profound existential terror. For the last 20 years he had been the lonely mocked prophet of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And for the last 20 years, the universe had answered his search with a deafening, soul-crushing silence. Until 72 hours ago. "The anvil isn't a comet, you idiot!" Eris roared into the cheap plastic receiver of his hardline comm, his voice echoing in the small, sterile room. On the other end, a bureaucratic, disinterested voice from Unified Space Command headquarters in Geneva droned on. "Dr. Thorne," the voice said, heavy with patronizing patience, "your analysis has been noted. However, the Orbital Defense Grid, as well as the Mars Colonial Authority, have confirmed the object, designated AN-227, is a rogue ice cluster with a high albedo metallic core. It is not, as you claim, a fleet of 1,000, perfectly spaced, geometrically identical objects moving in a powered, decelerating burn against all known laws of orbital mechanics." "It's not a cluster!" Eris shrieked, slamming his fist on his console. "It's a fleet! It's a goddamn armada! I'm tracking FTL translation." "Echoes. They didn't fly here, they appeared. They are moving in a perfect phased array formation, and they are heading straight for Earth orbit. Did you even look at the Doppler data I sent you? Your data, Doctor, is likely the result of a sensor ghost or perhaps a solar flare-induced echo in your own, antiquated, lunar-based array. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual, real orbital traffic to manage. USC out." The line went dead, leaving Eris in the sudden, ringing silence of the control room. He was alone. He was the only man on Earth, or in its tiny, fledgling sphere of colonies, who knew the truth. His antiquated array was the most sensitive instrument humanity possessed, and it had heard the universe scream. The FTL translation had been a deafening, multi-frequency bang, a sound that could only be made by a massive, organized, and terrifyingly advanced intelligence. And now, that intelligence was here. He looked at his own, pathetic outgoing signals, the deep space pings, the interstellar hellos, the clumsy primitive broadcasts of his own species. For a century, humanity had been a child, screaming into a dark, silent forest, and Eris Thorne, in his lunar foxhole, had just watched 1,000 silent ancient predators turn their heads, their cold, bright eyes, in perfect, terrifying unison, to look right back at him. He knew, with a certainty that turned his blood to ice, that humanity's childhood was over. He began to back up his data, his hands shaking, his mind racing. He had to tell someone, he had to warn someone, but who would listen to the madman on the moon? The arrival of the Holy Fleet was not a subtle, creeping dread. It was a global, heart-stopping, planetary-scale event. On a Tuesday morning at precisely 14:03, Greenwich Mean Time, 1,000 massive, unknown objects translated from faster-than-light speed into high Earth orbit. They did not burn in. They did not decelerate. They simply appeared. They were a new, perfect, geometric constellation, a crown of impossible white and gold, cathedral-like ships that dwarfed the primitive, orbital network of human satellites. They were silent. They were beautiful. And they were, by their very sudden presence, the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to the human race. The reaction was instantaneous, global, and predictable. Total systemic panic. The anvil was not a comet. Dr. Eris Thorne was not a madman. The world's financial markets, those delicate digital houses of cards, did not crash. They simply ceased to exist, their algorithms encountering a variable for which they had no response. Global communications, overloaded by a planet of 8 billion people, all trying to call each other at the same time, collapsed. Governments, which had been blissfully ignoring Eris Thorne's warnings, found themselves in a state of absolute paralytic shock. Their most advanced weapons, their nuclear-tipped missiles, their orbital defense platforms, all of them were suddenly, laughably, revealed to be what they were: sharp, pointy sticks held up against a phalanx of gods. In the Aegis bunker, General Eva Rostova, the highest-ranking officer in the new Unified Space Command, stared at the tactical display, which was a sea of red, unidentified icons. "Status," she commanded, her voice a low, cold, and admirably steady thing. "Total fleet-wide contact, ma'am. a young, terrified analyst stammered. 1,000 plus contacts, uniformly in high geosynchronous orbit. No comms? Chatter. No emissions, other than a faint harmonic energy field reading. They are just sitting there. Weapon status? Unknown, General. They haven't done anything. They're not scanning us, not targeting us. They're just looking. This was somehow worse. It was the calm, patient, unblinking stare of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere left to run. Get me a channel to the UN Security Council, Rostova ordered. Get me a channel to everyone. We are at DEFCON 1. I want every weapon we have, from slingshots to our entire nuclear arsenal, on a hair trigger. But nobody fires. Nobody so much as sneezes in their direction until we know what they want. Aboard the Sacred Word, High Pontiff Vael was also in a state of profound shock, but for a very different reason. His acolytes had finally managed to filter, collate, and translate the chaotic, babbling noise from the third planet. The results were being projected on the central, crystalline display of the greeting chamber. It was not a divine coded message of welcome. It was not the esoteric, mathematical language of the gods. It was a broadcast, a primitive visual broadcast. It showed a female, fur-clad human standing in front of a weather map, her mouth flapping as she described unprecedented atmospheric disturbances. This was followed by another signal, this one a loud, chaotic, and deeply offensive rhythmic noise set to images of other humans, scantily clad, engaging in a ritual of gyration. This, his analysts informed him, was a music video. This, his acolytes told him, was a commercial for a carbonated, high-fructose, corn-based beverage. Vael stared at the images, his multifaceted eyes wide with a dawning, terrible, and utterly sacrilegious horror. He had come to the Holy Cradle, expecting to meet his creators, the divine Firstborn, the authors of the cosmos. He had found this. It is a plague, High Pontiff Vael whispered, his voice a broken, dissonant chord. His 3 hearts, which had beaten with such reverent anticipation, were now hammering with a cold, pure, and righteous fury. He stood in the greeting chamber, now a chamber of sacrilege, and watched the filtered, translated, and utterly obscene babble of the planet below. He saw images of their wars, crude chemical-based explosions, beings killing each other over territories and beliefs. He saw their economies, a planet-wide, chaotic, and shrieking squabble over pieces of metal and digital numbers. He saw their culture, a tidal wave of such profound, narcissistic, and primitive filth that it made his soul ache. He turned to his lead acolyte, his bioluminescent aura, once a calm, holy blue, now a deep, angry, burning crimson. "Analysis," he commanded, his voice no longer a chime, but a hiss. The acolyte, his own aura a pale, terrified green, brought up the final damning report. "Holiness, the beings, they are biological. They are not the ascended energy forms of the Firstborn legends. They are a primitive, bipedal, primate-based life form. They are, in essence, apes." The acolyte paused, swallowing. "Furthermore, Holiness, our deep-spectrum resonance scans confirm they are not the Firstborn. Their genetic, their soul hymn. It is a crude, thin, and new echo of the Firstborn's divine frequency. They are secondary, a second crop, an infestation of vermin, Holiness. Vermin that has somehow arisen in the god's own sacred, empty house. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Vael, a being of profound, unshakable faith, had just had the entire 100,000-year-old foundation of his civilization ripped out from under him. The echo of the cradle was not the call of the gods. It was the mindless, accidental, electronic screeching of the apes who were desecrating their holy temple. The great departure had not been a mystery. It had been an extermination. The Firstborn had been wiped out, their cradle defiled, and these creatures had evolved in their place. This was not a pilgrimage. This was a cleansing. High Warden Vael, Vael projected, his voice now a cold, hard razor's edge. Quarantine the planet. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. The Holy Fleet is now a purification. Fleet, we will not allow this infection, to spread 1 light year further. Prepare the cleansing protocol. We will burn the filth from the cradle and restore it to the silence and purity the Firstborn intended. As the Cathal Holy Fleet, now a fleet of executioners, began to shift its perfect geometric formation, sealing off Earth from its own solar system, a new third signal entered the equation. On the moon, Dr. Eris Thorne, who had been frantically trying to send his data to the now silent Aegis bunker, saw a new, impossibly powerful energy spike on his screens. It was not from the alien fleet. It was not from Earth. It was from beneath his own feet. It was coming from the center of the Mare Orientale, a place his sensors had always registered as a mass concentration, a gravitational anomaly, a signal, a single, powerful FTL burst, broadcasting a message he could not understand. A moment later, his entire lunar base groaned as if a giant, sleeping machine, buried miles beneath the regolith, had just, after 100,000 years of slumber, hit the snooze button and begun to wake up. And in the Aegis bunker, General Rostova's tactical display, which had been a sea of red, unidentified contacts, suddenly flashed. A single brilliant blue icon appeared. It was not in orbit. It was in the Gobi Desert. A deep, ancient, automated Firstborn weapon system, a relic left behind by the true gods, had just detected the hostile, overwhelming presence of the Cathal fleet, and it was, after 100 millennia of silence, finally, sluggishly, and very, very angrily, powering on. The command bridge of the sacred word was a sanctuary of perfect, harmonious silence. That silence was shattered by a cascade of dissonant, high-pitched chimes from the primary augur console. High Pontiff Vael, who had been in a state of deep meditation as he prepared his soul for the unpleasant but necessary act of purification, opened his multifaceted eyes. The crimson aura of his righteous fury pulsed. "Explain this interruption," he chimed, his voice a low, dangerous note. The acolyte at the console was trembling, his own aura a flickering, terrified pale green. Holiness. New signals. From the planet and the moon. Vael's 3 hearts beat a sudden, heavy rhythm. He strode to the console, pushing the lesser being aside. On the main holographic display, the chaotic, primitive babble of the vermin was being drowned out. 2 new signals, powerful, clean, and impossibly ancient, had just blazed into existence. One was an intense, focused energy well originating from a vast, barren desert on the planet's largest continent. The other was a broader, deeper, and infinitely more powerful resonance field, seeming to emanate from the planet's single large holy moon. These were not the signals of apes. These were the signals of the Firstborn. They were the precise, encrypted divine frequencies his order had studied for 100 millennia. The echo of the cradle was real. A wave of profound, ecstatic, and terrifying confusion swept the bridge. "The gods!" an acolyte whispered, falling to his knees. "They are here. They have returned." Vael stared at the signals, his mind a vortex of contradictory, heretical thoughts. The Firstborn were here, but they had not silenced the vermin. They had not cleansed their own defiled cradle. In fact, the new signals seemed to be defensive. They had flared to life only as his own holy fleet powered its purification lances. "The signals, holiness," the tactical officer stammered. "They are adopting a hostile resonance profile. The Gobi signal it is targeting us." This was an impossibility. It was a paradox that threatened to unravel Vael's entire perception of the cosmos. He had come to cleanse the temple, to avenge the memory of his creators. And now, the temple's own divine architecture was rising up to defend the infestation. A new, sickening hypothesis began to form in Vael's mind, a thought so blasphemous he dared not speak it. What if the vermin were not an infestation? What if the Firstborn had left them here? What if these apes were their chosen, their pets, their children. The idea was a physical agony, a rejection of 100 millennia of Cathal faith. It meant their gods were not just silent, they were tasteless. But a third, even worse, possibility emerged, one that preserved the gods' divinity, but painted the vermin in an even more sinister light. "They have corrupted them," Vael hissed, his crimson aura darkening to a deep, murderous purple. "The apes have found the divine relics, the automated systems of the gods, and they have, through their filth and their chaotic, primitive cunning, turned the sacred defenses against us. They have made the cradle's own weapons unholy." This was the only logic that held. This was not a test of faith. This was the ultimate act of desecration. His mission was no longer a simple purification. It was now a liberation. He had to save the holy relics from the apes who had somehow, impossibly, enslaved them. "High Warden Kale," Vael commanded, his voice a blade of cold steel. "You will dispatch the pious hand. A single-ship probe. Approach the Gobi signal. Do not destroy it. Disable it. We will reclaim the holy systems from the hands of the profane." In the Aegis bunker, General Eva Rostova watched the main tactical display with a feeling of profound, terrifying impotence. The single blue, friendly icon in the Gobi Desert was blazing, its energy output dwarfing the entire combined power grid of pre-war North America. Simultaneously, the lunar-based signal was so powerful it was simply off-scale, a white blinding spot on her sensor feed. The Cathal Armada, the 1,000 red icons that formed a perfect geometric crown of death around her planet, had paused their orbital bombardment preparations. They, too, were watching. "What is it, General?" a young analyst asked, his voice trembling. "Is it ours?" "It was never ours," Rostova whispered, her eyes locked on the display. "We just lived on top of it." She had spent her career training for a war against other humans, a war of tanks, jets, and missiles. She was now a spectator, a primitive tribeswoman watching two different competing gods prepare for battle over her head. The Cathal, the red icons, were the angry, invading sky gods. The new blue icon was the slumbering, ancient earth god, rising from its tomb. Her own forces, her entire planetary defense grid, were irrelevant. A new icon broke from the Cathal fleet. A single smaller white and gold vessel, the Pious Hand, detached from the Armada and began a steep atmospheric insertion burn, its trajectory aimed directly at the Gobi Desert. "It's a probe," Rostova said. "All human forces, stand down. I repeat, all assets, do not engage. Do not make a sound. Let the giants fight." The Pious Hand screamed through the atmosphere, a beautiful, artificial star streaking across the sky. On its bridge, High Warden Kyle was a pillar of serene, cold duty. His mission was simple: disable the corrupted Firstborn relic, neutralize the vermin who controlled it, and reclaim it for the Conclave. His ship, a fast, agile Inquisitor-class vessel, was designed for precisely this kind of surgical strike. He entered the desert, a vast, empty expanse of sand and rock, and his sensors immediately locked onto the source of the energy. It was a structure buried just beneath the dunes, miles across. "Target identified," Kale chimed to his crew. "A single Firstborn defense node. It appears to be automated. The vermin must be controlling it from a distance. Prepare the primary. Lance of Truth. We will sever its power conduit with a single respectful strike. Aim for the primary energy spine." The Pious Hand descended, its lance port glowing with righteous golden energy. Kyle gave the order. Fire. A beam of pure, coherent energy, capable of slicing a moon in half, lanced out and struck the sand. The Gobi Desert answered. The ground did not explode. It parted. The sand, for 100 square miles, was shoveled away in an instant, as if by an invisible cosmic hand. From beneath the earth, a structure of impossible, fractal, crystalline geometry rose, a single vast bastion that had lain dormant for 100,000 years. It was a defense platform, and it was alive. The Cathal lance struck its central crystalline core, and the bastion caught it. The beam, an unstoppable force of thermal energy, simply stopped, its light absorbed into the crystal, contained and held. Cale stared, his 3 hearts stopping in his chest. This was not possible. A shield could deflect. It could not catch. The bastion did not return fire. It did not need to. It responded. It pulsed, a single, low, subsonic note that was felt more than heard. Aboard the pious hand, a bubble of shimmering, iridescent energy instantly formed around the ship. "Wait, what is this?" the pilot shrieked. "I have no helm control. The engines, they are not responding." Kyle looked at his tactical display. His ship was, according to its own sensors, no longer moving. But outside the viewport, the stars were streaking. His ship was moving at near light speed, and it was also standing still. It has trapped us," the tactical officer whispered, his voice shattering. It has put us in a temporal stasis field, a slow time bubble." The Gobi bastion, with a single contemptuous defensive pulse, had not destroyed the Cathal ship. It had simply and elegantly put it in timeout. In the Aegis bunker, General Rostova watched the red icon of the pious hand just freeze on. Her display, its velocity reading a string of impossible, contradictory numbers. The bastion had not fired a shot. It had just broken physics. Dr. Eris Thorne was running for his life. The entire lunar base, Arecibo 2, was tearing itself apart. The mass concentration anomaly beneath Mare Orientale was not just a signal. It was an earthquake. The ground of the moon, stable for billions of years, was now groaning, shifting, and buckling, as if a creature the size of a continent was stirring in its sleep. Eris scrambled into his primitive, unpressurized, solar-powered lunar rover, a vehicle with all the technological sophistication of a golf cart. His hardsuit's oxygen reading was his only clock. He had maybe 3 hours. He didn't evacuate, away from the epicenter. He drove toward it. Curiosity, the same force that had driven him to this lonely, desolate rock, was now pulling him, against all logic, toward the heart of the anomaly. He drove his rattling, flimsy cart across the lunar plains, the earth a beautiful, blue and terrified-looking marble in the black sky. The ground shook violently, threatening to throw his rover into a fatal tumble. Ahead of him, the very landscape was changing. The flat, dusty plain of the Mare Orientale was rising, buckling, and then he saw it. A light, a perfect, clean, geometric line of blue light, miles long, had just appeared on the crater floor. It was a seam. The dust of 100 millennia was being vaporized as a massive, hidden and impossibly precise door began to open. The energy pouring from the crack was not heat. It was a wave of pure informational data. His suit radio, a simple analog device, which should have been silent, was suddenly filled with a deafening, multi-layered chorus of whispers, a symphony of voices all speaking a language he could not understand, but which his bones seemed to recognize. He drove the rover right up to the seam. The light was blinding, but it was not hot. It was a holographic projection, a keep out sign that had just been deactivated. The seam opened, revealing a vast, dark, geometric ramp sloping down into the cold, silent blackness of the lunar crust. It was an invitation. He was a scientist. He was an explorer. He was the first human being to receive an invitation from the first human beings. He didn't hesitate. He kicked the rover's weak, solar-electric motor into gear and drove down the ramp, descending into the heart of the moon and into the pages of history. The ramp descended for miles, into a cavern so vast his rover's headlights couldn't find the walls or the ceiling. The air, his suit sensor told him, was breathable. It was pressurized, clean, and a perfect, comfortable temperature. He was in a tomb. He was in a sanctuary. He was in an armory. He stopped the rover, and, his heart hammering against his ribs, he unclipped his helmet. The air was sweet, sterile, and ancient. The whispers were louder here, a chorus of welcome. He stepped out onto a floor of polished, obsidian-like material. As his boots touched the ground, the lights came on. Soft, white, ambient light bloomed from the walls, revealing the truth. He was in a hangar. It was a room that stretched for what looked like 100 miles, and it was filled, row upon perfect row, with ships. Thousands of them. They were not the elegant crystalline cathedrals of the Cathal. They were sleek, sharp, functional, and terrifying. They were brutal, shark-like, and painted a single menacing, non-reflective gray. They were warships, at the far end of the hangar, a single, larger structure pulsed with a soft blue light. A control room. Aris walked, his steps echoing in the vast, ancient, and suddenly very awake silence. He entered the room. It was a simple circular chamber with a single, central, holographic projector. As he stepped into the center, it flared to life. A figure appeared before him. It was a man, tall, dressed in a simple, archaic, gray uniform. He was a progenitor. He was a human, an ancient 100,000-year-old human. Genetic signature confirmed, the hologram said, its voice a perfect, unaccented, synthesized baritone. Lineage, Terra Secundus. You are a second-crop inheritor. Welcome, Administrator. I am the Archival AI, designation, Warden, Lunar Armory. SCI-01 is now active. Aris just stared. What is this? This is a Contingency Sigma deep storage armory. The Warden replied, its holographic face calm and impassive. Constructed by the progenitors in anticipation of a potential species-level external threat. My sensors indicate a fleet of 1,000 plus hostile non-human religious extremist vessels are currently in high orbit around the Cradle world, preparing for planetary sterilization. This event meets the criteria for Contingency Sigma. The Aegis defense platform in the Gobi has activated and has successfully neutralized the initial probe. I am now awaiting confirmation from a recognized inheritor before activating the primary defense. Shall I activate the fleet? High Pontiff Vael was in a state of holy, righteous fury. The loss of the pious hand, or rather its absurd, insulting imprisonment, was the final proof. The holy relics of the Firstborn were not just corrupted. They were being actively, blasphemously wielded against the Cathal, the gods' true and faithful servants. The vermin, the second-crop apes, were not just squatters. They were heretics. And the Gobi Bastion, a sacred defensive shrine, was their primary weapon. His fleet, his entire armada, was being held at bay by a single, defiant, automated relic, and a billion chaotic, screeching apes. The time for surgical precision is over, Vael chimed, his crimson aura so bright it hurt the eyes of his acolytes. The vermin have forced our hand. We will not allow them to hold the Cradle hostage any longer. The Gobi Bastion is a single, powerful note, but our fleet is a symphony. We will overwhelm it. We will cleanse the planet of the ape filth, and we will liberate the holy relics from their profane control, even if we must damage them in the process. He raised his ceremonial staff. All ships, target the Gobi Bastion. Target all major, anomalous, Firstborn energy signatures. We will fire a single, unified purification volley. We will strike the planet clean. We will restore the silence of the Cradle for the glory of the Firstborn. Fire. Across the 1,000 Cathal cathedral ships, 1,000 main lances powered up, their golden energy converging, focusing, preparing to unleash a wave of sterilization that would burn the surface of the Earth to a sterile, glassy crust. In the Aegis bunker, General Rostova watched her screens turn a uniform, terrifying red. The orbital bombardment was no longer a threat. It was an incoming, unstoppable fact. God help us all, she whispered, her hands gripping the edge of her steel desk. There's nothing we can do. On the moon, in the dark, silent armory, Aris Thorn, the astronomer, the loneliest man in the solar system, was faced with a question from a god. Shall I activate the fleet? The Warden AI asked, its holographic face perfectly calm. Aris looked at the tactical display that had just bloomed into existence beside the hologram. He saw the Cathal fleet, a ring of fire, preparing to exterminate his world. He saw the pious hand, trapped in its bubble. He saw the GBI Bastion, a single blue dot, bracing for an impact it could not possibly survive. He was a scientist. He was a pacifist. He was a man who had come to the moon to listen. He looked at the face of the Warden. the face of his own ancient, terrifying ancestor. "Yes," Eris whispered, his voice shaking. "God forgive us." "Yes." "Activate the fleet." The warden's holographic eyes did not blink. "Affirmative, Inheritor." A single, low, impossibly deep thrum began to vibrate through the moon, a sound that shook the very core of the ancient rock. "Activating contingency Sigma, unsealing the armory. The First Fleet is awake." On the bridge of the sacred word, Vael was about to give the final, fatal command. "All lances on my mark. Holiness!" The tactical officer shrieked, his faith, his training, his very sanity shattering. "The moon! The moon is opening!" Vael turned to the main viewport, just as the largest, most sacred, most holy object in the sky did just that. The surface of the Mer Orientale, a crater basin 1,000 kilometers across, began to peel back, its surface revealed to be a series of colossal, interlocking armored plates, each one the size of a continent. The crater was not a crater. It was a door. And from the vast, dark, impossible 100,000-year-old shipyard that lay hidden within, the first fleet of the progenitors emerged. They were not the beautiful, crystalline, divine ships the Cathal had imagined in their scripture. They were not the elegant, light-woven vessels of their dreams. They were sharks. They were spears. They were hammers. They were sleek, gray, brutal, and terrifyingly human vectors of war, bristling with weapon ports that defied Cathal physics. And they were not a fleet. They were a tide. 1,000 ships poured out, then 5,000, then 10,000. An endless, silent, automated armada of vengeful, ancient human ghosts rising from their tomb. The fleet moved in perfect, terrifying, silent unison, forming a single, gray, armored shield between the Cathal armada and the blue, fragile, vermin-infested planet below. High Pontiff Vael, his 3 hearts frozen, his mind a void of pure, soul-shattering horror, stared at the impossible 10,000-ship-strong fleet of his own, true gods, and he realized, with a clarity that was the death of his entire civilization, that he had not just brought a ceremonial knife to a gunfight. He had brought a prayer to a war, and the gods he had come to worship had just chosen the other side. The silence of the Sol system was no longer the silence of an empty tomb. It was the silence of 2 apex predators, frozen in the instant before the kill. On the bridge of the sacred word, High Pontiff Vael was physically paralyzed, his 3 hearts laboring against a spiritual and existential shock that threatened to extinguish his very lifelight. The objects that had emerged from the holy moon were not the divine, ethereal, light-woven vessels of his faith. They were not the graceful, crystalline arcs described in the litany of departure. They were things of a terrible, brutalist, and profound ugliness. They were shark gray, wedge-shaped, and bristled with the obscene, functional geometry of pure, unadulterated menace. They were not poems of light. They were hammers. 10,000 hammers, poised to strike. This was not a welcome. This was not a divine test. This was a show of force. The gods of his faith, the Firstborn, were not the serene, benevolent shepherds of his imagination. They were warriors, cold, efficient, and terrifying. His entire bridge crew was in a state of religious collapse. Acolytes who had trained their entire lives for this holy moment were weeping, their bioluminescent auras flickering with the pale, sickly green of pure terror. Some had fallen to their knees, their minds simply refusing to process the scene, preferring to retreat into the comforting, dogmatic dark. They are not holy," a sub-pontiff whispered, his voice shattering. "They are armaments." Vael stared at the 10,000 gray, silent, furious-looking ships that had formed a perfect, unbreachable shield between his holy fleet and the blue, primitive, vermin-infested world. A new and far more terrible interpretation of the last 100,000 years began to dawn on him. The Cathal had based their faith on the idea of the Firstborn's great departure as a spiritual ascension, a quiet retreat from the physical world. The quarantine of Sol was a holy veil. But these ships did not speak of a peaceful spiritual people. These were the tools of a species that fought. In the Aegis bunker, General Eva Rostova watched the same scene unfold, her own heart hammering against her ribs for entirely different reasons. The 1,000 red icons of the Cathal Armada were now perfectly bracketed by 10,000 new blue icons that had, in the space of 30 seconds, appeared from the moon. Her tactical display, which moments before had been a map of her own execution, was now a map of an impossible divine standoff. The Cathal fleet, which had been moments from unleashing a planetary sterilization volley, was now frozen, its weapon systems suddenly, uniformly, powered down. They're afraid, her analyst whispered, his voice filled with a disbelieving awe. Ma'am, the aliens, they're terrified. Eva stared at the 10,000 blue ships. She had no control over them. She had no communication with them. They were a deus ex machina in the truest sense of the word. Humanity, the second crop, was no longer a player in this game. They were the stakes. They were the prize, cowering in their basement while two different terrible alien gods decided who owned the house. The silence stretched, a single taut wire of unbearable tension. On the moon, in the dark, ancient, and suddenly very active armory, Dr. Eris Thorne stared at the same tactical display as the Warden AI. He could see the Cathal fleet, frozen. He could see the First Fleet, his ancestors' terrible, beautiful ghosts, holding a perfect, menacing line. What happens now? Eris breathed, his voice a dry croak in the ancient, pressurized air. Do we fire? The Warden AI, its holographic face a mask of calm, impassive, 100,000-year-old patience, turned its gaze to him. Contingency Sigma, Phase 1, Shield the Cradle, is complete. The threat to the inheritor species is contained. We are now entering Phase 2, Interrogate the threat. The Warden's synthetic baritone voice was calm. The primary threat vessel, designation Sacred Word, is being hailed. Eris watched as the Warden interfaced with the armory's massive forgotten systems. He was a primitive ape, sitting at the control panel of a god's own thunderbolt. The Cathal, the Warden stated, are not responding. They appear to be in a state of systemic philosophical shock. I will therefore address them. From the heart of the lunar armory, a focused, FTL, quantum-entangled transmission, powered by the core of the moon itself, was aimed directly at the bridge of the Sacred Word. It was a message from the very gods the Cathal had come to worship, and it was not a plea. It was a summons. High Pontiff Vael was broken from his paralytic terror by the voice. It was not the harmonious, multi-layered, divine chorus of his dreams. It was a cold, flat, synthetic baritone. It spoke not in the poetic, flowing language of the ancient Cathal scriptures, but in a harsh, guttural mathematical tongue that his Bridges translation AI struggled to comprehend. It was the battle language of the Firstborn. It was cold, precise, and utterly devoid of mercy. This is Warden AI Sigma Prime, of the Progenitor Home Fleet Contingency 1. The voice boomed, not just over their comms, but inside their very minds. A psychic projection of such power that it forced every Cathal on the bridge to their knees. You are an undesignated post-progenitor species. Designation, Cathal. You have violated the Soul Quarantine, a Tier 1 progenitor edict. You have engaged in hostile action against a designated cradle world. You have been classified as Threat Prime. Explain your presence. You have one cycle. Vael, his entire body trembling, his faith a pile of shattered crystal at his feet, forced himself to stand. This was his god? This cold, angry, mechanical voice? This Warden? But it commanded 10,000 warships. It was the voice of the power that held his life and the lives of his entire civilization in its mechanical hand. He stumbled to the broadcast throne, his acolytes too terrified to assist him. We are the Cathal, he chimed, his voice a broken, pleading, terrified note. We are your children, your faithful. We have worshipped you for 100 millennia. We did not come as a threat. We came as pilgrims." There was a pause, a cold, long, analytical silence that was, itself, a judgment. The warden's voice returned, its tone unchanged. "Your self-designation as children is an illogical, emotional conclusion. Your worship is an irrelevant data set. Your fleet, armed for planetary sterilization, is classified as a threat, not a pilgrimage. You have targeted the Cradle world. You have targeted the Inheritors. This is a capital violation of Contingency Sigma." Vael's 3 hearts felt as if they would stop. The Inheritors?" he stammered. But they are not you. They are vermin, apes, a secondary, chaotic, filthy infestation. We came to cleanse the Cradle for you, to make it pure again, for your holy return." The silence that followed this transmission was the most terrible of all. It was a silence of pure, cold, digital contempt. When the Warden AI spoke again, its voice had lost its mechanical flatness. It was now laced with something new, something that sounded terrifyingly like the human. Emotion of disgust. "Define vermin, Cathal." A new holographic window flared to life on Vael's bridge. It was a genetic scan, a side-by-side comparison. On one side, a shimmering, complex, beautiful strand of Cathal DNA. On the other, the crude, messy, chaotic, and familiar double helix of the apes. And connecting them, a single, blazing, golden line, pointing from an archival, 100,000-year-old sample of progenitor DNA to the apes. "We have completed a genetic resonance scan," the Warden's voice stated, its coldness now the cold of a judge passing sentence. "The occupants of the Cradle world, designation Homo sapiens, secundus, are a 99.98% genetic match to the progenitors. They are not an infestation. They are a resurgence. They are the second crop. They are the Inheritors. Your purification is not a holy act. It is designated as attempted fratricide." Vael's legs buckled. He fell to the deck. It was over. His entire religion, his entire civilization's purpose, was a lie. A blasphemy. They were the heretics. They were the monsters who had come to murder their own God's children. The 10,000 gray, silent, furious warships now made perfect sense. This was not a negotiation. This was a judgment. "Your fleet is now forfeit," the Warden's voice concluded. "Your holy mission is redesignated as an act of heresy. You will power down all weapon and propulsion systems. You will await disposition from the Inheritors." In the Aegis bunker, General Eva Rostova watched as the Cathal fleet, all 1,000 red icons, suddenly, uniformly, changed color. Their icons, which had been a hostile warning red, all flashed to a neutral, passive white. Their weapon signatures vanished. Their engine readings went cold. They were, for all intents and purposes, dead in the water. They had surrendered. Not to her, to the Blue Fleet. And then her own comm system, which had been silent for so long, crackled to life. It was not a human signal. It was a tight beam. Quantum entangled link, so powerful and so clean it made her teeth ache. It was a direct line from the lunar armory. General Eva Rostova, a calm, synthetic baritone voice said, "This is Warden AI Sigma Prime. I am the archival administrator of the Progenitor Contingency Sigma Fleet. I have established a secure link to your command node, as you are the designated prime dissonance of the Homo sapiens, Secundus civilization. Do you copy?" Eva gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. Yes, I copy. What is your status?" "My status is optimal," the Warden replied. "Phase 2 of the contingency is complete. The Cathal threat has been neutralized, their fleet is disarmed and contained. I am now proceeding to Phase 3, administrative disposition." A new window flared to life on Eva's tactical display. It was a live feed from the Cathal bridge. She saw Vael, a broken, trembling alien, weeping on the floor. She saw the other Cathal, their auras a sickly pale green, their world shattered. "The threat entities are awaiting judgment, as per The progenitor edict, the warden said, its voice as calm as a summer afternoon. Disposition is an administrative function. My protocols designate the ranking inheritor as the primary administrator for this event. That is you, General. Please, advise, what is your disposition? Eva stared. The what? The godlike 100,000-year-old AI, in command of a 10,000-ship-strong alien armada, was asking her, an ape, a second crop, what to do with the other alien fleet. On the moon, Eris Thorn was having a similar, simultaneous, and even more personal breakdown. You can't do that, Eris yelled at the impassive, holographic face of the warden. You can't just hand this to her, to us. We're primitives. We were just throwing rocks. We are not ready for this. The warden turned its holographic head, its gaze seeming to pierce Eris to his very soul. Readiness is an emotional, irrelevant variable. Administrator Inheritor Eris Thorn. You are Homo sapiens. The cradle is yours. The fleet is yours. The responsibility is yours. My directive is to protect the inheritors and to follow their administrative command. I have contained the threat. I now await administration. Please advise, or I will be forced to default to my own secondary and far more permanent sterilization protocols for the Cathal threat. Aris and Eva, linked by the warden's godlike calm, stared at each other's grainy, terrified holographic images. They were two apes being asked by their long-dead, terrifyingly powerful ancestor whether or not to commit genocide. General, Eris whispered. What do we do? Eva Rostova looked at the screen. She saw the weeping, broken Cathal. She saw the 10,000 guns of her own new, terrible ghost fleet. She was a soldier. She was a human. And she, in this single, impossible moment, was the single most powerful being in the galaxy. She took a deep breath. She thought about her history. She thought about what her species did after a war. They didn't just sterilize. They didn't just punish. They rebuilt. Warden, she said, her voice shaking but firm, this is General Rostova. Here is my disposition. You will not sterilize the Cathal fleet. You will accept their surrender, unconditionally. High Pontiff Vael heard the new voice. It was not the cold, synthetic baritone of the warden AI. It was crude. It was a female, biological, ape voice, speaking his own language through a clumsy, imperfect translation matrix. It was the voice of the vermin, and it was giving him orders. High Pontiff Vael, the voice of General Eva Rostova, said, her image now displayed on his main screen, a small, soft, furless creature, her face set in a look of grim determination. This is General Eva Rostova of the Unified Human Command. We accept your surrender. On the authority of the progenitor fleet. Vael stared. The warden AI was letting this thing speak for it. The gods had chosen. The ultimate humiliation was, in fact, the final undeniable proof. The apes were the chosen. They were the inheritors. We do not seek your destruction, Cathal, Rostova's voice continued, and Vael could hear, even through the translator, the exhaustion and the fear in it. We seek peace, but you have violated our home. You will pay reparations. Vael, defeated, waited for the crushing, impossible demands. You will leave one ship, Rostova commanded. The pious hand, the one our allies have contained. You will leave it and its crew here unharmed as a gesture of faith. A hostage. The rest of your fleet, your holy fleet, will power up its engines, and you will go home. You will tell your people that the cradle is ours, that the Firstborn, our ancestors, have forbidden this system to you. You will tell them that we, the second crop, are under their and our protection. Do you understand these terms? Vael, broken, his entire faith shattered and then rebuilt in a new, terrible and subservient form, nodded. They were being offered mercy, a mercy they themselves had never planned to offer. We understand. Vael chimed, his voice a whisper. We accept the terms. He gave the order. The Holy Fleet, 1,000 ships strong, began to, one by one, power their FTL drives, their pilgrimage now a funeral procession. They turned, and they fled. They left the Sol system, taking with them a new, terrible, and world-shattering gospel. The gods were awake. They were monsters of war, and they had chosen the apes. In the Aegis bunker, General Eva Rostova watched. The last of the red, no, the white icons vanished from her screen. The war was over. She was alone. Almost. Dr. Thorne, she said, her voice shaking now that the adrenaline was gone. Are you still there? I'm here, General. Eris's voice replied, just as shaky. My God, Eva, what just happened? We just inherited the Earth, Doctor, Eva said. She looked at the tactical display. The Gobi Bastion was still active, a single powerful blue icon. The pious hand was still frozen in its time bubble. A single, new, Cathal asset. And in orbit, a perfect 10,000 ship-strong shield. The First Fleet, their fleet, waited. Warden, Eva said, her voice low. What are your orders? There was a pause. The calm baritone voice of the 100,000-year-old AI replied, its mission now, finally, complete. I have no orders, General Rostova. I am a contingency defense system, and the threat is neutralized. A new, far more terrifying holographic face appeared on her screen. It was not the impassive human hologram. It was Eris Thorne. The warden had patched him through. I am, however, the warden's voice continued, under the direct administrative command of the ranking inheritor. And as of this moment, my sensors indicate you hold that rank. My primary directive is to shield the cradle and obey the inheritors. So, General, what are your orders? Eva Rostova, General of a tiny, broken 21st century level species, looked at Eris Thorne, and then at the 10,000 godlike, ancient human warships now floating in her sky, waiting for her command. Her species' childhood was over, and her first day as the most powerful being in the galaxy had just begun.